and they come up in a guarded manner, and the elbows rise in a very dramatic and a very high fashion. So he's kind of like this. But you'll note that both men are reacting simultaneously.
This moment gives rise to what's called the single bullet theory, that the second shot hit both men passing through Kennedy to Connolly. This is challenged by those who say that Kennedy and Connolly were hit by different bullets from separate guns, and two guns would make a conspiracy.
Here we have President Kennedy and Governor Connolly at the moment of the second shot. This is the moment they're hit, the equivalent of Zapruder frame 223. As we know, President Kennedy was struck in the upper right back. He had another bullet wound in his throat. It was believed to have passed through his throat, moving back to front. Governor Connolly, struck in the right back just near the armpit. That bullet emerged his right chest about 1 inch below the nipple line. When we look at their positions, based on the Zapruder film, this is exactly how they were seated at that moment, at frame 223. Governor Connolly sitting slightly inboard of the president. In addition to that, he's turned sharply to his right. You can already see from this that any bullet striking the president in the upper right back and emerging out of his throat, that bullet is going to continue forward, and it's going to hit Governor Connolly exactly where he was hit. Connolly has to be hit. And the fact that they both react at the same time clinches it. So, it's not a magic bullet at all. It's not even a single bullet theory, in my opinion. It's a single bullet fact.
So if President Kennedy and Governor Connolly were hit from behind by the same bullet, where did it come from? Using the men's body positions and the locations of their wounds, Myers can isolate the source of the shot.
We can start with, for instance, Governor Connolly's entrance wound on his back. Connect that with the point of exit on the president's throat, and then take that line and project it rearward. What we end up with is a line that goes right back through the sniper's nest window, the 6th floor, of the Texas School Book Depository.
Dozens of witnesses pointed to the school book depository after hearing the shots. One witness reported seeing a gun in the 6th floor window. This is the building where Lee Harvey Oswald had been working as a clerk for 5 weeks. Within minutes of the shooting, dozens of police rushed into the building. The 6th floor was a maze of boxes. At 1:12 p.m., a deputy sheriff squeezed around a row of boxes in the southeast corner facing Elm Street and discovered the sniper's position. 2 boxes stacked as if to support a rifle. 3 shell casings scattered on the floor below the window. Photographers and fingerprint experts swept the scene. 10 minutes later, in the northwest corner of the building, between some other boxes, they found a rifle. After the shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald was the only worker missing from the building. The manhunt for him began. Police across the city were told to look out for a white male, 30, slender build, 5'10", 165 pounds, reportedly armed. It was on this street that 4 witnesses saw Officer J.D. Tippett motion Oswald over to his patrol car. As Tippett got out of the car, Oswald pulled a revolver and shot Tippett 3 times. Oswald moved closer, and as the officer lay on the ground, Oswald shot him once more in the head.
The evidence of Oswald shooting Kennedy, I think, is overwhelming, but many people contest that. The evidence of Lee Harvey Oswald killing Officer J.D. Tippett is overwhelming and ironclad.
Lee Harvey Oswald fled the scene of the assassination. Innocent people don't flee. They certainly don't try to shoot their way out.
Now, there were 2 manhunts underway in Dallas. The police didn't know they were chasing the same man. 35 minutes after the Tippett murder, the police were told that a suspect was in a nearby movie theater. Police arrested Oswald as he tried to pull his gun.
Now we're inside of the Texas Theater. Of course, everything is black. The movie is going on. Police suddenly jumped this man and started to drag him out of the theater. They scuffled and pursued inside of the Texas Theater.
The suspect jumped up, struck him in the face, and yelled, "This is it."
The police rushed Oswald away from an angry mob that had gathered outside the theater. Shortly after 2 p.m., he was taken to Dallas Police Headquarters, where they began to question him.
These people have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything. I didn't shoot anybody, no.
By that time, the press corps, including those traveling with the president, were now crowding into the Dallas Central Police Station. All they wanted to know about was Oswald. The FBI actually had an open file on Oswald, and one of the men in the building that day was FBI agent James Hosty.
My immediate assignment was to go to the Dallas police station, to sit in on the interview, and to tell the Dallas police everything we knew about Oswald.
The FBI knew that Oswald was a former Marine who had abandoned the United States and lived for almost 3 years in the Soviet Union. He had returned to the States with a Russian wife. The FBI believed that he was a committed communist. They'd been tracking him.
I work in that building. Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir. Back up, man. Come on, man. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I live in the area. I'm just a patsy.
I was trying to find him, but there was no urgency to find him. I mean, he hadn't said, I'm going to kill the president on November 22nd at 12:30, catch me if you can. Nothing like that. He disappeared, and I figured I knew I'd find him. But just a matter, I had other things to do, and it wasn't the most urgent case on my list. Now, see, I should have known.
But no one in the FBI had any idea that Lee Harvey Oswald had the mind of a political assassin. Alarm bells began to ring in government. Lyndon Johnson, the vice president, had visions of World War III.
We got on the airplane. It was heavily guarded by a cordon of menacing-looking men with machine guns at the ready, because nobody knew. Was this a coup? Who else was to be murdered?
Johnson had been briefed, even as vice president, that if there were a Soviet attack on the United States, one of the first things the Soviets would probably try to do would be to murder the president and the other top leaders of government.
As Vice President Johnson was sworn in as president with Mrs. Kennedy at his side, U.S. armed forces throughout the world were put on high alert.
President Johnson was convinced that there was a communist conspiracy engineered by Moscow. When were the missiles coming?
The new president left Dallas for Washington with no idea if he'd make it. Air Force One, carrying the president's body, arrived at Andrews Air Force Base near Washington at 6:05 Eastern Standard Time. Millions of people watched on television as the coffin came into view. They watched Mrs. Kennedy take her place in the hearse, bearing her husband's body.
Mrs. Kennedy is now coming down, following the casket.
Lyndon Johnson, who was now president, spoke briefly to the nation.
I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God.
Johnson had been afraid in Dallas that the assassination was the start of an all-out attack on the United States. He was somewhat less anxious now, but in the days ahead he would be haunted by what he was learning about Oswald from the director of the FBI.
Johnson gets a call from J. Edgar Hoover saying that this Oswald, who we think was probably the assassin, had been seen in Mexico City at the Soviet embassy, perhaps, or the Cuban embassy. Johnson almost immediately said, oh my God, I've now got to deal with another problem, which is Americans are going to think that the Soviets did this or the Cubans did this.
Ganaway also said the suspect had visited Russia and was married to a Russian. This is not immediately confirmed.
They will say, go to war against the Soviets or the Cubans in revenge. He didn't want that kind of pressure on him. He knew that that could lead us to a war that would kill, at the very least, tens of millions of people.
Suspect is again coming down the hall.
Johnson's fears were based on fragments of information about a man nobody really knew. Lee Harvey Oswald was a mystery, then and now.
One of the things the American public misses here is they look at this case and they have lost somebody in their thinking of conspiracy